Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl, and here we are with another series. This time it's focused on Warhammer the Old World. So for those that aren't aware, Warhammer the Old World is a return to the original lore and world of Warhammer Fantasy Battle before Age of Sigmar, and with it brings essentially a new game for the tabletop, but is a return to the style of Warhammer Fantasy Battle with rank and file. Now, this has been announced as being in creation right now with Games Workshop. There is currently no release date, but it certainly is expected either by the end of 2023 or the first half of 2024. So in reality, not that far away. Now, in terms of what this series is looking at, it's looking at those models that are currently available to buy that could well be expected to be part of the army books and army lists that will be used in Warhammer the Old World. Now, we do know there are new models coming, and we'll look at that when we come on to each of the factions. We'll be looking at the factions in alphabetical order, starting with those that are currently in the narrative, and then looking at those that are outside of the narrative, though we do know there are at least rules coming for every faction when the game is first released. Now, why am I doing this? Well, for people like me who are old Warhammer Fantasy Battle players that probably still have existing armies, maybe gathering dust somewhere, who haven't been keeping up to date with what's available on the web store, it's a look at what you could still buy to flesh out the armies that you already own. If you're new to Warhammer Fantasy Battle, then it's a look at, if you were going to start an army, what an army might look like, what the models might look like, and give you a chance to maybe dip in early. If you're like me, I'm a very slow painter, so this gives me a chance to buy models in advance of the game being released and have them painted and ready to play when the game does fully release. And as well, not many people are sat there with, £300, £400, £500. We don't know how big the armies are going to be to drop on an army on day one. So this does allow you to then spread the costs over buying the units over many, many months. And sort of you can buy a unit, paint it up, and next month buy a unit, and you're not having to find the money all in one go. Now, I should say everything that is in this series are personal opinions only. I have no inside knowledge. I have no relationship with Games Workshop in that way, other than being a fan of Warhammer Fantasy Battle and the lore of that game, and everything in the series is correct at the time of recording only, and I have based a lot of what I'm going to talk about on the last remaining army book that was published for the factions. Many of those will be 8th edition, but there are a few like Chaos Dwarfs and Bretonnia that didn't have 8th edition army books. Now, before we get into it, other miniatures are available. You can find, obviously, the old classic miniatures that are no longer available to buy from Games Workshop on eBay, for example. You've got other manufacturers that you can use as counts as, such as DS Vault with their sort of Crusaders and Templars and so on, Kings of War. There's also those 3D printer opportunities out there, whether you own a 3D printer and you're looking for the files, or whether you're looking for someone to do it for you. That's an option, but always remember that non-official Games Workshop models are not usually allowed to be used in their stores, at gaming tables, or in the tournaments. Also, when you're looking at the Games Workshop models on their website, check the bases. Some of these will have round bases, some of them will have square. Now, we know that they're going to be square bases, but we also know there's going to be some base size changes, so please keep that in mind when you're buying the models. And again, if a lot of times the bases you don't really care if you're just playing at home or playing in a local club, but if you are playing in tournament, you will need obviously the correct base sizes. But if you're not too fussed about making sure they're fully correct, then you've obviously, consider the fact that when you're playing a rank and file game like Warhammer Fantasy Battle was, and like the old world will be, movement trays will be a really important part. So you can mitigate a lot of the base issues with movement trays. Also, check the material. Some people really don't like fine cast, so there's still quite a lot of the old models that are dotted around that may well be fine cast, so check that out versus plastic. And if you are looking at stuff off eBay or whatever, and it's Forge World, that of course will be resin, so for example the Chaos Dwarfs. And overall, given what we know about Warhammer the Old World, the timeline it's going to be set in, I would avoid buying named characters unless there's a nostalgia thing. There will surely be rules, even if Games Workshop doesn't do it. The fan base will provide rules for some of those characters that you might have played in the past. You can consider the timeline and maybe take a gamble on, if you look at some of the longer lived characters, whether they be demons or whatever, even elves, for example. Maybe those characters will make an appearance. But with a new game, with a new timeline, I can certainly expect that we might see a few new named characters put in. Though, of course, as always, you can use these named characters as accounts as. So if you had Karl Franz, the Emperor of the Empire, for example, on his Griffin, there's no reason you couldn't use him as a general on Griffin if that option was available. So that is essentially the intro of why we're doing it and some of the considerations that you need to consider while we go through each of these videos. But without further ado, let's go and look at the next faction. So the next faction we're looking at is the Chaos Dwarves, and this is the first faction that is on the outside of the narrative campaign coming with Warhammer the Old World. And from what we know about that, these armies that we're going to be covering are not going to get rules beyond the initial release. So when the game first is released, there'll be rules for them, but we don't know how many, if any, miniatures will be coming back in terms of old kits. We don't know if they're going to get rules in the future, and we don't know if there's going to be any new models come in the future. I highly suspect it will depend upon how successful the game is. But the Chaos Dwarfs, starting with that, is kind of an odd one. They didn't get an army book after the 5th edition, and Chaos Dwarfs kind of disappeared from the tables, except for those that had these old armies, until the Legions of Asgore was released with Forge World. So what you're going to see here is based upon the 5th edition army book, but with some Forge World pictures and some classic pictures in there as well, just to give you a flavour for those that haven't come across the Chaos Dwarves, either for those players who previously played Warhammer Fantasy Battle, that Chaos Dwarves were not seen that regularly, certainly in the last few years of Warhammer, and for those that haven't encountered the Chaos Dwarves before. So in terms of special lords, there were 5. Drazoth the Ashen, which is the picture you see in the middle at the top there on his mount. Zatan the Black, Astrogoth Ironhand, and you can see an absolute classic old style miniature of Astrogoth in the middle at the bottom there, along with Gorth the Cruel and Shartor the Executioner. Lords-wise, there was the Sorcerer Prophet and Overlord, and despite the fact that Forge World did a whole bunch of models and miniatures for the Chaos Dwarfs, they're no longer available. So we're really doing this for the sake of completeness and to give those who haven't come across them before a look at what Chaos Dwarfs aesthetic is, and if you're looking to pick some up maybe via other means. In terms of special heroes, there was Rykarth the Unbreakable, Gordo's Backstabber, and Hrothgar the Renegade. In terms of heroes, you had a Despot, you've got a Demon Smith, which is the picture in the bottom middle there, and then you've got the Bull Centaur Tauruk. Now that is in the top of the centre of the pictures. You can see the size difference. Quite a large model, that Bull Centaur. And then there was a Hobgoblin Chieftain and the Altar of Hashut. In terms of the core units, well, they had quite a few. You got Chaos Dwarf Warriors, and you can see both of the images here are classic Chaos Dwarves, i.e. those that extend far back beyond the 5th edition. But you can see dwarf warriors there. Those are the ones at the bottom. You've got devastators. You've got hobgoblin warriors, which you can see in the center top. You've got hobgoblin wolf raiders, goblin slaves, and orc slaves as core units. In terms of special units, wow, didn't they have a huge amount to choose from? Well, you've got Infernal Guard. Well, if you're looking at the images here, the top left image is the Infernal Guard. There were Immortals, Acolytes of Hashut, Zealot Berserkers, Bull Centaurs and Bull Centaur Renders. So you can imagine that Bull Centaur Torah that we saw, it's going to be something similar to that, maybe slightly smaller, fielded in a unit. Black Orcs, which is leveraging the unit from the Orc and Goblins. Kadai Fireborn, who you can see in the bottom left there. There was a Whirlwind Tenderizer, Sneaky Gits, a Hobgoblin Spear Chucker. You've got the Iron Demon War Engine, which was a pretty cool model, and you can see that one bottom right. That is the Iron Demon War Engine. And then top right is the Magma Cannon. So, war machines being a big thing with Chaos Dwarves, and I have to say Forge World did an outstanding job with some of those models. And then finally there, you have the Death Shriek rocket launcher. Next up and finally is the rare units. So you've got the Dread Quake Mortar. Again, a really nice looking model, and you can see that center top there. That is the Dread Quake Mortar. And then below that is the Hell Cannon. Hell Cannon often could be seen in Warriors of Chaos armies as well, with a Chaos Dwarf crew, even though the Chaos Dwarfs kind of vanished from the tabletop. But that is the Hell Cannon. You can see there with its Chaos Dwarf crew. Also available in the army list, at least, was a Juggernaut Siege Tower, a Colossus, a Siege Giant, and a Kadai Destroyer. I love the Chaos Dwarves. I love their aesthetic. I think they're quite different from a lot of the other factions. We've seen how popular they've been in Total Warhammer, and you'd like to think that if the old world is successful, if they are going to bring some of these factions from the outside and do like a second edition, the old world, or they're just going to do kind of an expansion to the old world and bring in some of these other factions due to its popularity, it would be great to see the Chaos Dwarves make an appearance. And there you go, that brings us to the end of the Chaos Dwarf faction. I hope it's given you a flavour of what the Chaos Dwarves used to look like, what the more modern Chaos Dwarves look like, and some of the units that maybe we'll see in the future. And that is a very big maybe. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If not, give it a thumbs down and let me know why in the comments down below. And as always, if you want to see more content, then please hit that subscribe button. It's free for you to do. It means a lot for me, so thank you for that in advance. If you do hit that subscribe button, you'll also be notified when new content is released. You've been watching The Ghost Owl, and I'll see you very soon.